How do you feel great on vacation? Like really good? Easy. You go to Aruba. You'll spend your time relaxing on cool white sand beaches and floating in healing blue water. You'll immerse yourself in natural wonder and find your center on an island where things move at your speed. You won't just feel great, you'll feel relaxed, renewed, and ready for life. That's the Aruba effect. Plan your trip at aruba.com.
Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game with me, Kevin Day, and Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. How are you, Kieran? This is fine. Quite cold Monday morning, Kieran. How are you?
It is. I guess I'm in a slight state of shock. I'm trying not to be too smug because there's absolutely no reason to be. But yeah, things are good.
It's questions day, Kieran. I believe we've probably got our favourite question ever coming up at the end of this pod.
Yes.
I'm not saying everybody else has to up their game because they all ask brilliant questions, but the one at the end is fantastic. And I didn't believe you had a hope in hell of answering a question, but see, that's how obsessed I am with the question. I called you question instead of Kieran. I didn't think question you'd be able to ask our last Kieran. But it turns out I believe that you have, so I'm excited about that as well. I've got a couple of questions as well, Kieran, for you before we start. Question number one, the fuck were Spurs doing? Just how? But, I mean, it had been a bad enough weekend as it was. I was slightly cheered up at around 5:15 yesterday, and then I've got a phone call from Ed saying, have you seen what's happening? No. That's sure.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that I took counsel from TBBM, who's, and we all know at football, the bloke behind me. and the consensus was, if we kept it below 4-0, we'd probably say that was just about acceptable. It was a fantastic second half performance. We were as good as Spurs were good in the first half.
Yeah, I couldn't be more pleased for you. Talking of keeping it to 4-0, how's this for timing, Kieran? As we were leaving Selhurst Park at the end of the terribly tame performance against Liverpool, a mate of mine took comfort in the fact, well, at least our under-21s are doing well, aren't they? Beat Gillingham. They're growing up to it, which we worked out was around about the same time that you were scoring the first of 10 goals against our under-21. So that added what's the opposite? Adding a gloss. That took away the gloss. That left us down to the bare undercoat of the weekend. This is why producer guy says don't talk about football. He's quite right. We could have just cracked on. We'd be nearly at the end of the pod and the start of that brilliant question I can't wait to get to. But before we do that, we should mention, Kieran, that the Lassana Diarra versus FIFA case has now been resolved. We've been talking about it, anticipating it for quite some time. I think given the potential implications of it, Kieran, it's best that we leave that discussion until our news pod on Thursday, because we've got some cracking questions today. I think we should focus on those rather than that Diarra case. Everybody will know the outcome now. We have hinted at what's going to happen, so I think we can leave that till Thursday for a proper look at that, if that's okay with you, Kieran?
Yes, having been in contact with quite a few secret lawyers over the past few days, even by our standards, the phrase "it depends" has been used to the max.
I mean, really, the full gamut of emotions in the press has gone from it's the end of the world as we know it to nothing's going to change whatsoever. So
Yes.
I look forward to the view. Are any of our lawyers prepared to just come up and front up and just say, oh, you can name me? Or are they all too...
I think they quite enjoy being secret lawyers, just as our secret hammer and our secret executive and so on enjoy the mystique of being in the show and ears pricking up when they know that their words are being spoken.
Yeah, the secret hammer's invoice is a lot more easy to pay than the secret lawyer's invoice. They're not so secret when it comes to putting the name at the bottom of please pay as soon as possible, are they? Our first question comes from Thomas George, Kieran. And Thomas says, my question is about fair market value and how it would be accounted for, which has become a topical question in the last couple of weeks. If a club bought a player from a related party, for example, for £10, the Premier League would obviously deem that not to be a fair market value, e.g. Neves from Saudi Pro League to Newcastle. How would the PL enforce a fair market value? I assume they can't force a club to pay a certain amount, So how will it be accounted for? And second, would being a related party or not change what is considered a fair market value?
I think this is a very valid question
Yeah.
in the present environment, Thomas. So thanks for bringing it to our attention. In terms of international transfers, in particular between related parties, we can always go to our very good friends at Watford and their very close relationship with Udinese. Watford have more transfers to and from Udinese, who are not quite related parties, but they just both clubs happen to be owned by the same family, but not the same person in the family. So it's a slightly tenuous relationship. But what we have seen is that the Italian FA does apply what they refer to as a fair market valuation scheme. And what they will do under those circumstances is they do, I understand, first of all, look at places such as Transfer Market. But Transfer Market is a fascinating website, and it's a website which drives an awful lot of attention. But if you take a look at the comments from the person who created Transfer Market, he said, it's done on the weight of numbers. It's done effectively. We have an algorithm which people put in what they think a player is worth. And of course, that is open to bias. That is open not to manipulation, but we all have rose-tinted glasses when it comes to our players and less than rose-tinted glasses when it comes to opposing players. So Transfer Market has been quoted in some deals, but in my view, it's not a reliable indicator of current market value. So what we are now seeing is that the football authorities will go to the data gurus. And remember, we had Ian Graham, the former head of research at Liverpool, on the show a couple of weeks ago. And in relation to that, the likes of StatsBomb and Opta and these now very professional organisations that are involved in football, they do their own valuation metrics. But even so, you have to be very careful, because if you at Palace need a left back because your coach wants to play inverted left backs who are better going forwards than necessarily tackling, but you've got a good left-sided centre half who can make up for that, the value of an individual player to club X is not the same as the value of that player to another club that's perhaps looking for a left back with different characteristics. So it's as much art as it is science. It depends whether you're on the sales side or the buy side. But you can normally come up with a number. And we have also seen when there's been disputes with clubs, and I know this has always been a sensitive topic for Palace fans, about the Bostock case, how much is a young player worth in terms of their future potential? You genuinely don't know that, and it is difficult to quantify. So that's where we are in terms of market values. There are expert sources which can be used, and there's effectively, I think it would go to a 3-person tribunal, people with experience of the industry. And as Thomas said, it's a bit, as we've always said when dealing with the Inland Revenue, HMRC, if you don't take the mickey out of them, they won't take the mickey out of you. So provided it's a ballpark. The difference between 14 and 16 million pounds, there isn't any, to be perfectly honest, because as we have seen with many major transactions, a club will put in an initial bid of 70 and it could end up at 90 quite easily within the space of 2 weeks. So if you thought a player was worth 72 weeks ago, why are you now paying 92 weeks later? And there's other issues which relate to how close are you to the end of the window. But Thomas then talks specifically with regards to related parties and the accounting of this. What you have to separate is what you physically pay for the player to what a tribunal will say the player is worth. So it could be that if Newcastle sell or buy a player from a club in Saudi to which the PIF are linked, the two clubs might arrange a fee of 40 million, and that could be the cash that physically is exchanged. But the market panel might say, well, in our opinion, he's only worth 25. So the figure of 25 goes through the accounts and the figure of 40 goes through the bank account. So the two things are independent of one another.
Right. So I think I understand that. But if Newcastle say a player is worth 10 million and the Premier League say he's worth 15 million, Newcastle, you can't force Newcastle to pay that 15 million. You account for it, the discrepancy, the way you just explained.
That's right. You would just put through an adjustment through the accounts for that 5 million. And the Premier League is more likely to investigate player swaps than player transfers, which is why, if we go back to what happened just before the 30th of June this year, there were a number of intriguing deals between clubs, but they were never player swaps. So Nottingham Forest bought a player from Newcastle, I think it was Anderson, and Forest's second choice goalkeeper went to Newcastle 24 hours later. And then Newcastle ended up paying about 20 million for him, which seemed strange given the state of Newcastle's PSR position. And he's never got anywhere near the first team. And effectively from day one, he's been looking to, or the clubs would appear to be looking to find him somewhere else to play. That was a marriage of convenience for both clubs. It kept within the rules. It's further evidence that the rules in their present form aren't really fit for the purposes of PSR. And we also saw Chelsea and Leicester involved in player swaps, where we saw, I think Everton were involved in player swaps with Villa, both going both ways. And it just so happened that all of those 6 clubs, I mean, when I did this written report, which was pulled for a well-known football satellite broadcaster, the 6 clubs happened to be Forest, Leicester, Newcastle, Chelsea, Everton, and Newcastle. Have I said Newcastle? Well, there were 6 clubs who happened to be involved in these deals, and I wrote the article a week before all these deals went through, and it was just an amazing coincidence.
Yeah, of course. You use Palace as an example there, Kieran, where we're all right for centre-backs. What it turns out we haven't got is a backup right wing-back. We've got 8 centre-backs and 0 backup right wing-backs. And considering we play wing-backs, you'd think they would have rectified that situation, Kieran, wouldn't you? It seems strange to go right back to what you said at the start, that Udinese and Watford are not considered related parties when the parties that own them are actually related.
Yes, I mean, the definition of related parties is complicated. There's an accounting definition. We now have a new definition called associated parties, which is something which the Premier League sprung upon an unsuspecting world about 2 weeks after the Newcastle acquisition by PIF. And that is forming the basis for the Manchester City case against the Premier League, which may have been successful for Manchester City or may have been successful for the Premier League. But given that both parties are staying very tight-lipped, we don't know. And we will only, I think, get some significant indication when the next Premier League chief executive meeting takes place, which is probably in a month's time. And if on the agenda there is something in relation to APTs, we might be able to draw some conclusions from that, or we might not.
Well, it was on the agenda for the last Premier League CEO meeting until about 10 minutes beforehand.
Yes.
In which case everybody started drawing their own conclusions, none of which were the same as each other. Ben Bannister has our next question. Ben says, do you think the recent increase in investment in non-league football was just a phase, or do you think it's something that will be increasing going forward? And I suspect the words United States of America will be mentioned in the answer to this question, Kieran.
You are Doris Stokes reincarnated there, Kevin.
Oh, no, Doris Stokes. She'd be furious if she was reincarnated, wouldn't she? For younger people listening, Doris Stokes was a famous psychic. That's how bad TV was in the 70s. Doris Stokes would go on TV and communicate with the dead, which in some cases was half the audience. This is why I don't tend to get nostalgic, Kieran, because there was a time when if you wanted to guarantee a round of applause, she would turn up on things like the Generation Game. And then if she wasn't available, Jeanette Charles, who looked a bit like the Queen, would turn up and get a massive round of applause for looking a bit like the Queen. Now you get Coldplay on. This is why I prefer the modern times, Kieran.
So the game's not gone, as far as you're concerned. Is that what you're saying?
It's so the game's it went halfway through the first half on Saturday. That's another question. What's happened to refereeing in this country, Kieran? We need to find the financial aspect so we can discuss it in a non-aggressive way. Of course, I'm very aware that we should never be overly critical of referees, but something's happening at the PGMOL.
I've been in contact with them, and we're making slow progress with because I think there is from our business point of view, I think there are important discussions to be had in terms of, is it now a worthwhile career for somebody that wants to go on the refereeing pathway? We've got the initiatives between PFA and PGMOL.
Yeah.
There's the costs of running Stockley Park. Do the costs outweigh the benefits? That depends on which side of the decision you're on at the time, in my experience. But it is fascinating. I've always defended referees, and I've always say, have a go yourself, and then tell me what percentage of decisions, if you had that match filmed, how many of those decisions you'd actually stick up to. Yeah, it looked like a penalty to me.
Kieran, we've always defended referees, but it's quite clear that somebody at the PGMOL is sticking pins in a little wax doll of Crystal Palace at the moment, or Steve. I mean, that's probably an unlikely scenario. They'll have found a more modern way of doing it. The problem is, Kieran, as we're discovering, and as we discovered when we wrote the book, it's easier to get details out of FIFA and UEFA than it is out of PGMOL. They are an incredibly secretive organisation, which, on a serious note, and we will get back to Ben's question, on a serious note, I don't think is right in modern football. We've always spoken about transparency, but I can understand the PGMOL's rule, but trying to find out how much referees are paid, how much women referees are paid, how much time, it's just an impossible situation, and trying to get a straight answer out of them is equally difficult. And as we've always discussed, the less information you have about an organisation, the more people will speculate and come up with conspiracy theories. That's why they need to step forward and tell us a bit about the finances of what's going on, because they're affecting the finances of clubs at every level of football. It's as simple as that. Arguably, the bloke behind me at Sellers Park would argue we've had 4 points lost through dodgy refereeing decisions. I think we've had 4 points lost because we haven't been that good this season, but there's merit in that refereeing argument, and until referees come out and say, well, this is why we gave that decision, rather than nonsensical things like the contact wasn't there for long enough, it stopped him reaching the ball before the goalkeeper did. And then there's a penalty for Bournemouth. It literally went in the same airspace as a defender. That's a different podcast. Ben Bannister says, do you think the recently increased... I'm in such a bad mood, Kieran. Oh my Lord, I'm in a bad mood.
The last thing you need is an irritatingly cheerful person on the other end of the call.
Normally, Kieran, if I'm in quite a good mood, I love your irritating cheerfulness. It's not even irritating, Kieran. It's just lovely, upbeat cheerfulness. And if it had been any other club that had done that to Spurs, I would have been highly delighted. I would have been laughing at Spurs all the way. But 10-0 as well. You can't lose 10-0 at any level of football to Brighton. But, jeez. Anyway, Ben Bannister says, do you think the recently increased...
Ben, sorry, Ben. We're building up your part here. So this is what it's called in the profession. As far as the interest in non-league football, and I think as Kevin rightly alluded, we have seen significant interest following the success of Welcome to Wrexham. So if you take a look at the lower leagues, we've got American owners now at Crawley, we've got American owners now at Carlisle United. And if I was pitching to potential American investors, I would be fairly candid. You can buy yourself out of the National League, given the relative lack of constraints in terms of cost control. So you can buy yourself out and be successful. Probably cost you 3 or 4 million. You can do the same in League Two. We can do the same in League One, as Birmingham City are very likely to achieve, given the level of expenditure. And then all of a sudden, you are 46 matches away from the Premier League and all of the glamour that brings. So if you're advising potential buyers, the first thing I always say in terms of a deal, what are your objectives? Is it a trophy asset? Are you just having a bit of fun with some money? Are you looking to rate a return on this investment, and so on? And the other thing you should always say is when's your exit date? Or is there an exit date? Because if you want to be in and out in 18 months, then that's a completely different scenario to if you're looking to, if we take a look at FSG in Liverpool, they've been there for a decade. They've been spectacularly successful financially, and so on. I would expect there to be qualified interest. Some American investors might feel that the ship has sailed and the valuation prices have gone up, but I don't think that's particular. There is so much money in America, and the American economy has had a very successful period over the course of the last decade or so. regardless of the popularity or non-popularity of individual presidents. The growth in the US economy has been far faster than it has been in Europe. And then you've got issues in terms of the exchange rate. The exchange rate in general has been beneficial for American investors. It's made buying clubs in the UK cheaper. And at the same time, what we're seeing is that the cost of buying into US franchise sport has gone up and up and up. So we're now talking, I think there was talk about a deal for around about $8 billion for one of the NFL teams. Yeah, they pay 19 times a year. And I appreciate there's NFL matches taking place at the Spurs Stadium yesterday and next weekend and then at Wembley. And all of those matches are sold out. And for those people who are complaining, and I think there's legitimate complaints about the level of pricing for Premier League football matches, just take a look at the prices for the NFL matches. Even Liam and Noel thought they were a bit sniffy numbers. So there therefore becomes very cheap alternatives in the form of there's the historic link with the UK, and not just England. Scottish clubs have become very popular for American investors as well. They're cheap. You got the exchange rate benefits, and there is the belief that the trend in terms of football is the Disneyfication, is the Americanization of the game, that they would much rather there were 4 quarters than 2 halves, because it would mean that there's more potential slots for advertisements if the match is broadcast and so on. Will we ever reach that point in the world of football? Never say never. I mean, it certainly was one of the proposals of Super League, for example, and none of the clubs, you didn't see Liverpool or Manchester United or Barcelona say, I think that's a terrible idea. They all said, yeah, bring it on.
I'd be interested in exploring something that a Tottenham fan told me the other day, Kieran, if only because I've known a Tottenham fan for a long time, and I can't always trust everything he says, but he claims one of the things he hates about the NFL games at Spurs is that the club shop has no Spurs merchandise in it whatsoever when the NFL games are played. Now, if that's the case, I mean, that seems to be a missed opportunity, but I'd be interested in exploring whether that is the case, because I think that's something we could discuss. Going back to Ben's question, I think there will be Wrexham fans, Ipswich fans as well, who will be saying, well, we didn't use our American money to buy our way out of those divisions. We did it through shrewd transfers, good tactics, good management, whatever. And also, I think, Kieran, the more people start buying clubs in the National League, the more difficult it becomes to buy your way out of the National League, particularly when there's only automatic promotion for one team. So I think there will be fans of clubs in the National League who say it's not quite as easy as that anymore.
It's not easy, but it is easier.
Yeah.
If you take a look at Wrexham, the first season they had in the National League, they were beaten by Grimsby in the playoffs. But they certainly had a budget which far exceeded that of any other club. I think you will find that is the case for Birmingham. Ipswich, nothing but praise for Ipswich in the way that they've gone from League One to the Premier League. If you take a look at their losses in League One, the losses were quite spectacular.
All right. Okay. Alan Lingard has our next question. Alan says, we often read that 14 votes are required to make any change to Premier League rules. Are there any restrictions on this? For example, those clubs in UEFA competitions will have the capacity to earn disproportionately more than the rest through ticket sales, broadcast pies and scarves. Could it be possible that the other 14 demand that this money is tipped into the pot? Or are there limits, possibly legal ones? I mean, you talked about this last week, Kieran. Could the 14 get together and demand that Man City can't play in Sky Blue anymore? So I'm interested in the answer to this.
I think this is an intriguing situation. They are Premier League clubs, and therefore, if you take a look at the constitution of the Premier League, their remit is limited to that of Premier League actions. UEFA has a more senior position than the Premier League. So that's why, for example, if there are UEFA Champions League or Europa League matches taking place, you cannot have a Premier League match on at the same time. Which is crazy, because it could be that Palace have had a good cup run and they've got fixtures to fulfil towards the end of the season. Well, you're not supposed to be able to do that if that clashes with a UEFA match, and that's part of the grandfather father son relationship that we have in world football. You've got FIFA, then you've got the interconfederations, then you've got the individual football associations, and here the FA has devolved responsibility to the Premier League. So in terms of could the 14 gang up on the 6, conceptually, yes. But what the so-called Big Six have done traditionally is they've inverted that. They say, if you make a decision that we don't like, we will take our ball down the other end of the street and we'll form a Super League with Real Madrid and Barcelona and so on. And actually, they've managed to extract very significant concessions from the remaining clubs in the Premier League. And actually, the gap between the smaller clubs and the bigger clubs on a dollar basis has significantly increased as a result of that. So it could be done. There's a further issue in that I think there is a 21st share in the Premier League, and that's owned by the Football Association. But in terms of what the Football Association has done with its voting power, I think the word FA also comes into the conversation. And that's disappointing. I was on LBC this weekend with Matthew Wright talking about the issue of the regulator came up. And he said, I'm not a huge football fan, but are you in favour of the regulator? And I said, well, I'm very reluctantly in favour of the regulator because I'm not a big believer in interfering with individual businesses. They tend to let them get on with it. But if you had good governance within the game, if you had a football association which led the whole game, then you wouldn't need a regulator because the FA would take that role. It gave away so much to the Premier League in 1992. And I also think there's a case for saying the Premier League has done fantastically well and it has transformed the game for the better. But is there any need to have a separate Premier League and EFL anymore now that transformation has taken place? And then we could have a single governing body, and a lot of the squabbles that we have wouldn't exist. But that's in nobody's interest, because if you've got a job for the Premier League and somebody's doing the identical job at the EFL, if you join the two bodies together, somebody's job's going. So you understand why that progress isn't made. So it's a very messy situation, but you can put anything on the agenda, in effect. And it's a 2/3 majority, by the way, rather than 14 votes, because what we are seeing now is that the traditional lines, the traditional demarcation between the Big Six and the other 14, that has collapsed. I'm fully aware of one of the Big Six, for example, which has got a particular issue in relation to Manchester City, who is another member of the Big Six. And some of the proposals that have been put forwards by this other Big Six member are clearly targeting Manchester City because the chief executive has got some form of a bee in bonnet with regards to City. And this is nothing to do with 115 charges.
Given that you, as you say, you need a 2/3 majority for any vote to go through, the idea that the FA has a 21st share and therefore potentially a casting vote is ludicrous, because you're never going to need a casting vote, because there's never going to be a split. It's never going to be 10-all when we need the equivalent of Shirley Ballast to decide who's going to be going through. It's a 2/3 majority. So why did the FA have this share in the first place? It seems completely unnecessary.
Well, I think, again, you've got to sort of get into the footballing TARDIS here and go back to 1992. It's a token gesture by the clubs that formed the Premier League towards the FA. Oh, no, we're still involved here. Look, you can still have a vote. But that vote is effectively kept in a little sealed box and never utilised.
Richard Kitson has this next question, Kieran. Richard says, it's becoming more apparent that clubs such as Chelsea are using their academy-produced players as assets to sell to offset their FFP requirements. If they are assets, then surely their value, if they're young players, will appreciate over time and would then be eligible for capital gains tax. Do clubs have a capital gains tax liability in such cases?
Well, I think there's two issues here, Richard. First of all, in the specific case of Chelsea, Chelsea have lost more money than any other club in the history of the Premier League. And the way that the tax system works, and I don't teach tax anymore these days, is that if you lost money, let's say you lost 50 million in 2022 and you lost 70 million in 2023, you start 2024 on minus 120 million. So even if you make a profit in 2024, you can effectively offset your previous losses. So Chelsea have got the opportunity to do that. In the case of Chelsea's academy, which has been spectacularly successful, Mason Mount, Conor Gallagher, Victor Tomori, Tammy Abrahams, Billy Gilmore, you look at all of these players that have come through, and then there's many, many more. The way that it works is that the tax only effectively becomes an issue when the player is sold. So even if the value of your academy, you've got 10 players at the start of the year who are perhaps worth 100 million, and at the end of the year we now think they're probably worth 400 million, they've been so successful. It's only when the players are sold that tax issues arise. It's exactly the same if you think about it, Kevin, from the position of your house. If you bought your house in 1970, for example, for £30,000, and it's now worth 800,000 or whatever it's going to be, you're not having to go and pay tax until potentially you sell the house, and then you roll it over to another house and so on. So there aren't really any significant issues, Richard, unless you sell a lot of players in a single year. So potentially Brighton might have a big tax bill from the sales of Caicedo and Cucurella and so on, but that doesn't tend to happen that often in clubs.
Of course you'll have a big tax bill. You'll have a bigger tax bill than anyone else, probably. Yeah, and you can afford to pay it. Paul Hudson has our next question, Kieran. What do you think of the proposed changes that would ban clubs from signing or loaning players from other clubs under the same owners? Is this anti-competitive?
I think it is anti-competitive. I mean, if we look at the broader issue of the MCO, the multi-club ownership model, it does have benefits in the sense that you have continuity and consistency in terms of diet, physical regime, tactical, cultural, and so on. And therefore, if you've got a promising player and that player ends up at, should we say, the satellite club with a view to bringing them into the mothership in 2 or 3 years, for me, that's business planning. So to prevent that taking place seems harsh. And then I think it's fairly well known as far as our listeners are concerned, we're not cynics on this show. But if that was the case, all that I would do is I would sell the player to a club which isn't part of the MCO, but with which we have a friendly relationship. And you park that player there for 12 months and then he moves on to the mothership or vice versa. So, with all hurdles, with all rules, I still recall my very first law lecture at university. This crusty old professor came in and said, just remember, folks, for every rule, there's a loophole. And of course, one of us pipes up, what if you go and kill somebody? He says, self-defense. You don't go to prison for that. Or if you're a soldier and you kill somebody, you don't go to prison for that. You go, oh. So there are rules, which if introduced, then I can assure you, and this isn't a criticism of either profession, the accounting profession, the legal profession would quite easily circumvent that set of circumstances.
You're quite right, Kieran. We're not cynical on this pod, although I have just accused the PGMOL of sticking pins in a wax doll of Steve Parish, and that's quite cynical.
That could be a Christmas blockbuster toy. That could be the new Kaplunk.
If we keep playing the way we're playing, Kieran, they could sell it in the club shop. They'd make a fortune. We're heading towards that final question, Kieran. I really genuinely can't wait. But first of all, we have a question from Ben Robinson. I'm not implying, Ben, that you're the warm-up act for our final question, because this is a particularly good question. Ben says, during the Winter World Cup, winter for us, we should point out, clubs received compensation from FIFA for players involved in the tournament. Does that apply to normal international breaks too, particularly in relation to lower league players whose clubs are still playing during international breaks?
Yes, if it is a FIFA-sanctioned competition. So if it's a World Cup qualifier, there will be some form of financial compensation. If it's a Nations League, there will be some form of compensation from UEFA and so on. If it is just a friendly, then it comes down to the relationship between the Football Association and the club. Many football associations will. Many will also say, look, this is a friendly, this is an opportunity for your player to reach the pinnacle of their career in representing their country. And what the Football Association could also do is to say, well, you do realise that we happen to know that if your player gets an international cap, you benefit in terms of some of your sponsor payouts, in terms of add-ons, if that player is then sold and moves on. There are benefits which are coming from other parties other than the international football associations, many of which are skint, by the way. I can assure you, I'm aware of the finances of some of the smaller countries who will still have players, not necessarily huge numbers of players who are internationals, who are playing their matches in Europe. And those particular football associations make close to nothing in terms of revenue because they don't have the broadcast deals. Their main payouts actually come from FIFA in terms of the annual payments and so on. So they physically don't have the resources to pay for if you have a player who is also playing for a club in the Bundesliga or the Premier League or the Liga or so on.
Well, here we go, Kieran. I'm worried I've given this question too much of a build-up now, but I think it deserves it. And just by way of a little bit of context, Kieran, it always amazed me back in the day when certain clubs had a fan base who were, shall we say, more robust than others, that you would literally almost take your life in your hands sometimes going to Upton Park.
Yes.
But the same grown-up blokes who would happily have kicked the bejesus out of you would then go inside the ground and sing the most jaunty song you could imagine. Whilst I imagine about their dear old mums and their next plate of jellied eels. It's a great tradition. Nobody knows why, I don't care what West Ham fans say, nobody knows why they sing Bubbles in the first place. It could be that they had a player who looked like the kid who advertised Pear's soap, which had bubbles in it. It could be it's just a song that was popular down the tube stations during the old Blitz, and they still managed to get a piano down there somehow. But the question comes from Graham Sloan. And it always amazes me how our listeners can come up with, there's got to be a financial angle to that. Graham Sloan says, American listener here, huge Everton supporter, and I'm deeply grateful for your explanations about our finances. But my question is about the West Ham bubbles. I think they're a great tradition to start games. Brackets, do they also bubble up when they score? That's not an image I wish to explore, to be perfectly honest. West Ham fans bubbling up is something I'm going to leave in the darkest recesses of my subconscious. But Graham says, I'm curious if you could estimate how much, he actually says you all could estimate, which is makes me think that he may be from the southern states of the USA. I'm curious if you all could estimate how much West Ham might be spending on the bubbles, including staff, soap / bubble solution, bubble machines, and other bubble-related expenses. I tried to count the bubble machines last time I watched a game at the London Stadium, which is a huge expanse to fill with bubbles. I think I counted 4 machines, but there may have been more. It figures that these industrial bubble blowers would go through many gallons of solution each, maybe 10 or 12 gallons of soap each game or more. I think I've used up our annual quota of the word bubbles, Kieran. I don't know if it'll be out of this, but this made me laugh a lot when it even put a smile on the face of producer Guy, which doesn't normally happen unless interest rates go up. But it's a cracking question, Kieran. You've indicated to me that it is possible to answer this, but I'll be interested to know who gave you the blinking answer.
Well, I got in contact with West Ham.
If you're going to tell me they've got a secret bubble machine, mate, I'm going to be furious. If he says it depends,
I can't give a definitive figure, but for people that have been to West Ham at the new stadium, you have a lot to thank for a guy called Mick Bowen, known as Mickey Bubbles, as he would be. You can just see him popping down the old Vic, can't you? Old Mickey Bubbles.
Popping down? Don't say popping down to Mickey Bubbles. I would have gone for Bubbles Bowen. Bubbles Bowen. Mickey, of course he's Mickey Bubbles. That's hilarious. He's Mickey Bubbles, his 2 little bubble boys. That's great.
So originally, Mickey started off at the bowling ground, but since moving to the new stadium, bubbles have now appeared before every match. It used to be sort of 5 or 6 a season. And I think there are now somewhere in the region of 50 to 60 bubbles machines at West Ham. So it has sort of become a full-time responsibility. And this is God's honest truth. We now have AI bubbles.
No.
Yes. Yeah, we now have technologies. We've got AI bubbles technology to make the bubbles bigger. You can now fill the bubbles with smoke. They're trying next to experiment with new colours in bubbles. So they'd like to, of course, get claret and blue. So yeah, a lot of bubble technology has improved from the old days when you'd pop along to the your newsagent and persuade your mum, who'd then go berserk because you get full of bubbles in your clothing and so on. But yeah, it's clearly we might try and get hold of Mickey Bubbles and see if he comes on the show to give us a proper explanation. But the actual cost itself, I cannot quantify. But clearly, it's a significant part, and it's possibly the only thing that West Ham are playing for at the start of the match, because the nets and the goalposts and the flags are all paid for by LLC, where it's called E20, the landlord.
My guess is, Kieran, that Mickey Bubbles will only be too pleased to come on the show, and his mates will only be too miserable. They'll go, oh my God, he's full of himself as it is. Now he's been invited onto a podcast to explain how the bubbles work. If we could get to the bottom of how much it cost, even if Mickey Bubbles could just give us a ballpark figure, that would be great. And I don't know much about rainbows, but they should be able to get blue in a bubble. It's all reflected light. Blues in the spectrum. Claret is a sort of claret in the. Why would they want other? I've become obsessed now with bubbles since this. I also like the idea you're saying that back in the day the bubbles were supplied by the ball boys and ball girls with those tiny little bubble things blowing like crazy to get one or two rolling onto the pitch. Graham, thank you for that. You would have thought, as an Everton fan, you'd be more interested to find out the cost of the toffees they're chucking out.
They don't get many toffees at Everton these days.
No, they don't. Yeah,
health and safety gone mad.
I think it was probably health and safety that put paid to a slightly bemused older lady throwing handfuls of sweets into the faces of. So they don't do it at Panto anymore in case you take out a kid's eye, which is, I would have thought, quite difficult with a fruit gum, but there you go. in the sort of thing. When Ali has to do risk analyses for tours and things, the stuff that she has to go. You occasionally will find her throwing fruit gums at walls just to see what happens if somebody doesn't like their rider. What if somebody's got fruit gums in their rider and they throw him angrily at the wall? We better put that in the risk assessment as well. What happens if there's a fire? We haven't got to that. We're still doing fruit gums in eyes. Thank you to everyone who's donated. What if a kid gets a bubble in the eye at West Ham, though, Kieran? That could be. It turns out we got more questions for Mickey Bubbles than we thought. Is his job more important than that? Always, it's the other thing that intrigues me about West Ham. The only club in the country whose mascot is essentially a deadly weapon. Everybody else has got something cuddly. They've got a hammer.
They got sued by Timmy Mallet, didn't they? They got there was a cease and desist from Timmy Mallet.
What does Timmy Mallet want to put an end to it all DIY then? You can't use. I'm sorry I laughed so much, Kieran. Just momentarily, I was back in the Parson's Arms with a bloke called Graham going, yeah. Timmy Mallet told him that he said he'd sue him. Like, off, Graham. No, it's true. What's the outcome of the cease and desist?
I think they reached compromise, but it was a bit bizarre.
I'd just like to see the look on the judge's face if Timmy Mallet turned up in a Hawaiian shirt and a baseball cap with a mallet in it. We've got Nick DeMarco coming on the show, so we'll put that down as a question. What would you do, Nick, if your client was Timmy Mallet, who's trying to sue everyone? Camping shops? No, you can't use a mallet on those tent pegs. I've got you. I love the fact he wants to trademark the name Mallet. Ay. Thank you to everyone who's donated to the pod via our Patreon page. If you'd like to make a small monthly contribution as well, that'd be very kind of you. It will get you access to our chat community and our regular quizzes. And you can do that by going to patreon.com/priceoffootball. If you have a question you'd like answered on our show, email us at questions@priceoffootball.com. You can follow us on Twitter, X, don't forget, and you can find us on our YouTube channel. The aforementioned book is now out on paperback, and you can find it in bookshops, or you can find details on our website, priceoffootball.com. We'll be back on Thursday with that deep dive into the Lasana Diarra decision and many other stories. In the meantime, I shall hand you over to Kieran Maguire for his customary farewell.
Well, thank you, everybody, for asking the questions today. Many of these questions are quite old in the sense that we have a waiting list, which, according to producer guys, is now almost stretching to 12 months in respect of some questions. We will never give up, even if we have to use Doris Stokes and a seance from beyond the grave. We will answer those questions from you in due course. Whatever happens to myself or Kevin, we will get to that. There's a way that you can shortcut having to wait so long for a question, and you can come along to our gig at the Cheerful Earful Comedy Podcast Festival, which is taking place Thursday week at Balham. I think there's still a handful of tickets left, but I think they're nearly all gone. It'll be good. You know, me and Kevin will be there for a chat before and after, and really looking forward to meeting up with people. We've been a few months since we've been on the road, so that'll be absolutely fantastic. And if you want to support the show in another way, by all means, give us a review using your apps. And you can even say you would rather have the show presented by Timmy Mallet and Mickey Bubbles. I think that would be sort of like WWE, scrap between the two parties. That'd be fantastic.
Oh, that would need a referee, wouldn't it? I like the fact you say we're going on the road. It's one train stop from my house.
I'm coming down from Liverpool.
Oh, are you?
Yes.
Oh, God! You plan to sleep on Wolverhampton Station overnight, and you're excited about it, aren't you?
Yes. If I miss the last train, that's it.
Yeah,
I'll do an impromptu gig at Wolverhampton Station at 2:00 in the morning.
Some genuine insight into how cheerful you actually are. That when it turned out you might have to sleep on Wolverhampton Station, you were delighted.
Well, it's spreadsheet time.
But at least I'm in a better mood than when we started this podcast, Kieran. So thank you for that. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
The price of football. The price of football.